Alright, today this is a video on how to take notes. I'm sure in many of your classes you've needed to take notes, and some of you probably have done fairly well in taking notes, and some of you probably have not taken the best notes that you could have. So, to start off, why bother? Number one, when you go through and you take notes and you actually physically are writing the notes, not typing them, not getting them and just photocopying them from somebody else, it actually triggers memories. You actually, when you look at the notes, you'll be able to then go back and you almost kind of can imagine hearing what was going on when you were doing the notes. It's also very often a good source of clues for what I think is important. So what I go through in my lectures, those are the key points you're going to want to see in your, it's going to be what you probably are going to see on the test. Alright, another one is it actually gets information kinesthetically. So for those of you who learn by doing, actually writing it down gets it into your brain a little bit better. It gives you the resource. It narrows down what you need to study for your tests. And finally, often we will have stuff in our notes that you might not be able to find either in your textbook. I'll have examples that you might not see somewhere else. Now, when you take notes, some of the things you want to make sure that you do is you want to make sure that you're actually concentrating on the lecture or the reading material. You don't want to take notes just to take notes. The notes is the end product of the process. You want to minimize your distractions. Taking notes while you have a whole lot of other stuff going on is actually very ineffective. If you're taking notes and you have music playing, if you are taking notes and have the TV on, you often don't actually remember the content that you took the notes on, and so you end up having to study a lot harder and take a lot more work to get to the same end point. Now, you do want to take your notes consistently. Don't just at the beginning of the reading. I see a lot of people do their notes where they have a whole lot of really dense notes at the beginning of a reading, for the beginning of the chapter or for the beginning of a lecture, and then it peters off and gets to almost nothing. You don't want to have tons in one spot and less in the other. You want to actually space it out and be pretty consistent. You want to take notes selectively. You don't write down everything, just the main ideas. The idea of notes is, again, they will remind you of what you read or of what you heard so that you don't need to write down everything. It's kind of these key points. You want to organize your notes. So this can occur in a lot of different ways. Some people like outlines. That's the method I usually use. But you can do flowcharts, you can do diagrams, you can do mind maps, whatever you find the easiest, both to record the information and then also to read the information and get it back. You want to be brief. Only the main points. You want to have very, very short, sweet things. You don't want to use complete sentences. You do, however, want to be legible. If you can't read your own handwriting, it didn't really do what it's supposed to do of having something you can go back to. You don't want to be concerned with spelling or grammar. You can have awful spelling. You can have awful grammar. As long as you know what it says, the notes are working. And then our other big guideline here is you want to review your notes. Notes aren't just, hey, I took them and I'm going to look at them right before the test. You actually want to go through and re-look at your notes about 2 or 3 days after you took them initially. And you want to review them. And that basically means reading through them. And any spots that are unclear 2 or 3 days out, rewrite. Because 2 or 3 days out, you haven't completely forgotten what you wrote. But if you're being unclear, you want to clarify it so that you can then do better. Alright, I have a quick mnemonic to kind of help you with the overarching pieces of taking notes. And this is for any class, and it's ABCLOU. So the ABC is abbreviate, use bullets, and caveman language. And then LOU is lists, one word, and use your own words. So when we abbreviate, instead of writing out with, do the W and a slash. Do the delta shape for change, e.g. for example. You can use any kind of shorthand as long as you know what it means. If you do little up arrows for increase, down arrows for decrease, if you know what it means, that works. Bullets. Don't use complete sentences. Short, quick phrases. Do it in bullets. For caveman language, think of like the 2-word phrases. Hey, I got this idea. Combine words. Make points. Very short, very sweet, not big, long, convoluted sentences. You want to get it down to like 2 words. For lists, doing lists works wonderfully. So if you have any kind of criteria, just list them out. Try and use 1 word if it will work. For several, you don't need to write out, for example, if I'm talking about the scientific method, and I don't have to write out scientific method every time. If I just write S period method, I know what I mean after I've written it once. Use your own words. Make sure, however, that you record the source and page number if you're using a text. That way, if when you go back you're not quite clear on your notes, you can go back to where you got them from and be like, oh yeah, that's what I was trying to write down. Alright, now what I'm going to go through is some specific help for taking notes out of a text, and then also taking notes from a video or a lecture. Alright, so when you take notes from a reading, from a textbook, it's really a 3-part process. What you want to do first is you want to preview the chapter, and basically what you're doing here is you're skimming through the text. You're not reading it closely. You want to know what you're supposed to be reading. What are the main topics? What chapters? What is the overarching idea that these notes are going to be on? Then skim through and read every heading and title as you go through. Not reading any of the paragraphs, just headings and titles. Look over the pictures, the charts, the graphs, and then at the very end of the chapter, read the review questions. Now, do all of this, and it's not trying to answer those review questions, but you want to read them before you actually go through to read it for real. So step 2 is to actually read the text and read it closely. And this is called reading for understanding. So as you read for understanding, you do want to avoid distractions. That means if you want to listen to music, it needs to be music without lyrics. It actually has been shown that if you have lyrics, you don't retain the information as much, regardless of how you feel like you're concentrating. You feel like you're concentrating better, but you actually perform worse on concentration tests. Now, you want to read actively. And what this means when I say read actively is you're really thinking about the material as you're reading it. You want to divide your assigned text into manageable sections. Don't try and do it all in one solid read. You want to go through, you want to think as you're reading. You want to try and summarize ideas, connect it to things that you already know. Ask questions to yourself as you're reading it. If you remember some of those review questions, be like, oh, that's where the answer to that review question is. As you go, you want to summarize your main points. After each section, try and summarize that section and identify 1 to 3 of the most important details in that section. You don't want to skim over the supplemental material this time. Actually look at the graphs. Look and see if you can understand what they're trying to show. Read the graphs, look at the pictures, really try and understand and process what's being done. Alright, so step 3 is the actual taking notes. So this far we don't have anything written down. We've summarized it in our head. We haven't actually written anything. So we skimmed, then we read the passage, now we're going to actually take the notes. So what you go through is you want to be selective but thorough. Basically go through and starting at the beginning again, you don't want to write down every piece of information in the book. You don't want to do 1 fact per page. Usually what works pretty well is if you go about a paragraph, 1 or 2 paragraphs, and then summarize it into a sentence or a couple of bullet points. This helps kind of get you down to the main nitty-gritty of what you need. You want to do paraphrasing. You do not want to put it in the book's words. Put it in your own words, because then when you go back and review, you'll remember it a lot better. Use a format that works for you. I mentioned this before, whether it's a bulleted list, a timeline, flowcharts, outlines, however it is that you think that the information makes the most sense. Also, you want to add visual elements. One of the things that really helps is if you do a quick copy of a graph instead of trying to write out the information about it. If you have a simple diagram, a lot of times when you think of like the water cycle, this done as a diagram works as far as understanding a lot easier than a paragraph about where does the water go. Having all the different pieces and the arrows simplifies it. So you do want to use visuals in your notes. So this is the main piece as far as taking notes from a text. Now the next point here is going to be taking notes from a video. When we take notes from a video, you are really looking at a slightly different point here. So in a textbook, it's not going anywhere. There's not something you have to try and catch before it goes past. So in a lecture, especially in video form, there's a couple of things that you want to do. So first thing is, when we do video lectures, part one, again, 3-part process, preview the video. Watch the video all the way through, not taking notes, pen's not in your hand, not even trying to take notes. Once you finish watching the whole video, then make an outline. Say, okay, first they talked about topic A, then B, then C, then D, and leave space. Then watch the video again and take notes. This is where, after each section that you had in your outline that you remembered, you pause, put down the details, any of those main points. You don't want to write down word for word what's said. If you need to rewind. But really, if you pause, you should be able to have the main core ideas there. Leave space between those points so that if there's other details that relate back to that initial point later in the video, you can add it in at that logical place in your notes. You can go back and say, oh yeah, that is another reason for point A. You do want to use graphics. It's quicker to sketch a graph than it is to describe it. So when you are in a lecture or you're watching a video, sketch. It really does go a little bit faster. It doesn't have to be fancy sketches, but it does help when you are looking at diagrams or you're talking about processes. Finally, you got to review the notes. So once you have viewed the whole video and you've done your notes, you want to look them over. And as you look over, you want to go through and make sure you know what your main points are. So you can either highlight those, underline them, have some kind of marking on them. Same thing with the key terms. So if there's terms there that you know are going to be key vocab terms, you want to highlight them, circle them, color code them, and basically you want to make sure your notes make sense to you. Now going back to just the general pieces about notes, we kind of wind up here, you do want to go back and look at your notes 2 to 3 days after you take them. Review them and make sure that they still make sense to you. As you're studying for a class, you want to go back and review all of your notes, I'm going to say at least once a week, and go through and review them even if the test isn't for another couple of weeks, because the more you review as you go, the better you end up doing on the test in the end, because you're not cramming for the test. You're actually learning the information and assimilating it so that it's not something you have to try and then remember later. It's something that you then just know. Alright, so this was our video on how to take notes. Thank you.